November 18th, 1944. A farmhouse, 3 kilometers east of Puffendorf, Germany. SS-Oberscharführer Klaus Weber crouched inside the turret of his Panther Ausf G, watching American Sherman tanks maneuver across the muddy fields below. His tank sat hull down behind a low ridge, engine idling quietly, 75mm KWK-42 cannon loaded and aimed. Weber had been a tank commander since Kursk. He knew his Panther was superior to the Sherman in nearly every measurable way. Better armor, better gun, better optics. The Panther's frontal glacis was 100mm thick, sloped at 55 degrees. The Sherman's was only 63mm at 47 degrees. The Panther's gun could penetrate 112mm of sloped armor at 1,000 meters. The Sherman's 75mm gun struggled to penetrate the Panther's frontal armor at any range. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Weber had destroyed 11 Allied tanks since July, 6 Shermans, 3 Cromwells, 2 34s. He understood how tank combat worked. Engage from distance. Use superior optics and gun range. Kill with the first shot. Retreat before the enemy can coordinate artillery or air support. His gunner, Unteroffizier Hartmann, had the first Sherman centered in his telescopic sight, range 800 meters. Hartmann was patient, experienced. He waited for the perfect shot. The American tank was moving slowly across open ground, turret traversing left and right, searching for targets. Weber gave the order. Fire. The Panther rocked backward from the recoil. The armor-piercing shell crossed 800 meters in less than 2 seconds and struck the Sherman's frontal hull. The impact was visible even without optics. The shell penetrated. Smoke poured from the engine deck. The Sherman lurched forward, then stopped. Crew began bailing out. 1 kill. Hartmann was already loading the next round. The loader, Gefreiter Bauer, pulled an armor-piercing shell from the ready rack and slammed it into the breech. 5 seconds. Hartmann acquired a second target. Another Sherman, 900 meters, slightly angled. Fire. Another hit. This Sherman brewed up immediately. Flames erupted from the turret hatches. The crew did not escape. 2 kills. Weber's radio operator reported American artillery fire incoming. Time to displace. Standard German tank doctrine. Shoot and move. Never stay in one position after firing. The Panther reversed down the slope. Engine roaring. Transmission grinding. They moved 300 meters north to a secondary firing position they had prepared earlier. The Americans were retreating. Weber counted 9 Shermans, withdrawing across the field. His battalion had stopped an American armored probe with minimal losses. 1 Panther damaged, repairable. 5 American tanks destroyed. The mathematics favored Germany, but Weber also understood the larger mathematics. The mathematics that Germany was losing. His Panther company had started the Normandy campaign with 14 tanks. Now they had 7. Replacements did not arrive. Spare parts did not arrive. Fuel did not arrive. The Americans kept coming. Weber had learned to count enemy tanks during every engagement. July, he saw 20 Shermans. August, 30. September, 50. October, 70. November, the Americans seemed to have unlimited tanks. That afternoon, Weber's company commander, Hauptmann Ritter, called all tank commanders to a meeting in a barn 4 kilometers behind the front. Ritter was a veteran of the Eastern Front, Knight's Cross recipient, professional soldier. He spread a map across a wooden table. Ritter explained that German reconnaissance had captured an American supply depot 2 days earlier near Eschweiler. The depot contained ammunition, spare parts, rations, fuel, standard American logistics. But reconnaissance officers had documented something unusual. Ritter produced a typed intelligence report. The report detailed the ammunition found in the depot. Tens of thousands of rounds. 75mm shells for Sherman tanks, 76mm shells for the newer Sherman variants, 90mm shells for tank destroyers. The numbers were extraordinary. But what caught Weber's attention was a specific notation. Each Sherman tank at the depot had been allocated 90 rounds of main gun ammunition. 90. Weber's Panther carried 79 rounds. 82 in the newest G variant. The Americans were allocating more ammunition per tank than Germany could. Ritter continued. The intelligence report included captured American technical manuals. The manuals specified ammunition stowage for Sherman tanks. M4A, one with 75mm gun. 97 rounds standard, reduced to 90 for wet stowage configuration. M4, a 3 with 75mm gun, 97 rounds. M4, A3 with 76mm gun, 71 rounds, but that was due to the larger shell size, and American doctrine compensated by ensuring more tanks and more frequent resupply. The Tiger I carried 92 rounds. The Tiger II carried 80 rounds in early production, 86 in later production. Panthers carried 79 or 82, depending on variant. The Americans had designed their medium tank to carry as much ammunition as Germany's heavy tanks. One tank commander, Oberleutnant Kruger, asked the obvious question. How did the Americans manage to produce that much ammunition? Not just produce it, but deliver it. Every Sherman meant 90 rounds minimum. Multiply by the thousands of Shermans the Americans were fielding. The numbers became incomprehensible. Ritter had an answer. American industrial production was operating at a scale Germany could not match. The United States was producing 15 million artillery shells per month by 1944. Tank ammunition was a smaller proportion, but still measured in millions of rounds monthly. American factories were safe from bombing. American logistics networks were intact. American supply ships crossed the Atlantic with minimal losses after 1943. The ammunition reached the front. Weber thought about his own ammunition situation. His Panther had started the day with 43 rounds, 50% armor-piercing, 50% high-explosive, standard German allocation. He had fired 2 rounds that morning, 41 remaining. The last resupply had been 6 days ago, 15 rounds. Before that, 8 days, 20 rounds. German logistics was collapsing. Ammunition was being rationed. American tanks did not ration ammunition. Weber had watched Shermans fire at targets repeatedly. 10 rounds, 15 rounds, 20 rounds at a single target. American doctrine emphasized volume of fire. If the first shot missed, fire again. If the second shot missed, fire again. Keep firing until the target was destroyed or suppressed. German doctrine emphasized precision. First round hit, conserve ammunition, make every shot count. The American approach worked when you had unlimited ammunition. The German approach worked when you did not. But there was another factor. The captured intelligence report noted that American tanks carried a mix of ammunition types, optimized for flexibility: armor-piercing, high-explosive, white phosphorus, smoke. The Shermans could engage any target effectively. German tanks carried mostly armor-piercing rounds because that was what was available. High-explosive rounds were increasingly scarce. Weber's Panther had 22 armor-piercing rounds and 19 high-explosive rounds, 2 smoke rounds. The mix was dictated by supply, not by tactical preference. The meeting concluded. Tank commanders returned to their units. Weber walked back to his Panther thinking about numbers. 90 rounds versus 79. It seemed like a small difference, 11 rounds. But those 11 rounds represented something larger. They represented industrial capacity. They represented logistics networks. They represented an enemy that could afford to give every tank more ammunition than Germany could produce. November 20th. The American offensive resumed. Weber's Panther was in a defensive position near Borheim. American artillery had been pounding German positions for 6 hours. The barrage was heavier than anything Weber had experienced. Thousands of shells. The ground shook continuously. At 1400 hours, the artillery stopped. Smoke obscured the battlefield. Then the Shermans came. Weber counted them through his optics. 30 tanks in the first wave, 40 in the second wave. They advanced, slowly, carefully, using terrain for cover. American infantry followed behind the tanks. This was a deliberate, coordinated attack. No reckless charge. The Americans had learned. Weber's company had 4 operational Panthers. 4 tanks against 70. The mathematics were impossible. But German doctrine did not require stopping 70 tanks. German doctrine required destroying enough tanks to break the attack's momentum, kill 10, 15, 20. Force the Americans to pause, reassess, bring up more artillery. Buy time for German infantry to reposition. Delay the inevitable. Weber's gunner acquired the lead Sherman. Range 1200 meters. Long shot, but the Panther's gun was accurate at that distance. Fire. Hit. The Sherman stopped, burning. The American column paused. Exactly as doctrine predicted. Weber's loader was already inserting the next round. Hartmann acquired another target. Fire. Another hit. 2 Shermans destroyed in 30 seconds. The American advance slowed. Tanks began dispersing, seeking cover. But they did not retreat. That was the difference between July and November. In July, American tank units would withdraw after losing 2 or 3 tanks. They would wait for artillery support, air support, reinforcements. Now, they kept coming. The Shermans began returning fire. Not accurately. Most shots went wide. But the volume of fire was extraordinary. Weber counted impacts around his position. 10 rounds in the first minute, 15 in the second minute. The Americans were not trying to hit him with precision fire. They were trying to suppress him with volume, keep his head down, keep him from firing effectively. It was working. Weber could not maintain continuous observation. He had to duck below the turret rim every few seconds as shells impacted nearby. His gunner fired again. Another Sherman hit, this one immobilized but not destroyed. 3 kills. Weber's Panther had 38 rounds remaining. The Americans were still advancing. More Shermans appeared through the smoke. Weber realized the Americans were saturating the battlefield with tanks. German doctrine assumed you could destroy enough enemy tanks to stop an attack. But that assumed a finite number of tanks. What happened when the enemy had unlimited tanks? Hartmann fired again. Miss. The round went high. Hartmann swore. Adjusted elevation. Fired again. Hit. 4 kills. 36 rounds remaining. The Americans were 300 meters away now. Close range for tank combat. Dangerous range. German advantages in optics and gun range meant nothing at 300 meters. American tanks could penetrate Panther armor at this range if they hit the turret or the lower glacis. American fire was intensifying. Shells were hitting all around Weber's position. One round struck the front slope of his Panther. The armor held, but the impact shook the entire crew compartment. Weber's radio operator reported another Panther destroyed. 3 Panthers remaining. Weber made the decision. Fall back. They could not hold this position. The Americans had too many tanks, too much ammunition, too much of everything. The Panther reversed into a drainage ditch, turned, and accelerated east. American fire followed them. Shells impacted the ground where the Panther had been seconds earlier. They displaced 2 kilometers, taking up a new position on the eastern edge of a small forest. Weber's crew was shaken but intact. His Panther was damaged, superficial hits, still combat effective. But they had expended 14 rounds in 10 minutes, 22 rounds remaining. The American advance continued through the afternoon, wave after wave of Shermans. German positions collapsed one after another, not because German tanks were inferior in direct combat, not because German crews lacked skill, because the Americans had more tanks, more ammunition, more fuel, more everything. By dusk, Weber's company had been reduced to 2 operational Panthers. They had destroyed 23 American tanks. The Americans had lost 23 tanks and were still attacking with 50 more. That night, Weber's Panther withdrew to a maintenance area 12 kilometers behind the front. The tank needed track repair, one road wheel damaged by artillery fragments. The crew needed rest. They had been in continuous combat for 16 hours. Weber conducted a weapons inventory. His Panther had 14 armor-piercing rounds remaining, 8 high-explosive rounds, no smoke rounds, 22 rounds total, less than 30% capacity. The ammunition supply officer at the maintenance area informed Weber that no resupply was available. The ammunition trains had not arrived. American fighter bombers had destroyed 2 supply columns on the roads from the rear. The next allocation might arrive in 3 days, maybe 4 days. Might. Weber asked how much ammunition they could expect. The supply officer estimated 20 rounds. Maybe 30 if they were lucky, Weber calculated. 14 rounds remaining now. 20 or 30 in 3 or 4 days. His Panther would operate at half capacity for the foreseeable future. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The Americans did not operate at half capacity. Intelligence reports confirmed that American logistics maintained consistent ammunition flow to frontline units. Captured American supply documents showed that each Sherman tank battalion received ammunition resupply every 48 to 72 hours. Thousands of rounds delivered to the front continuously. American supply doctrine emphasized redundancy. Multiple supply routes, multiple supply dumps, mobile ammunition carriers. If one supply column was destroyed, another was already moving forward. German supply doctrine emphasized efficiency. Single supply routes, centralized supply dumps, rail-dependent logistics. When the supply system functioned properly, it was adequate. When the system was disrupted by Allied air attacks, partisan activity, or infrastructure damage, the entire chain collapsed. By November 1944, the system was permanently disrupted. German tanks in the West were operating with chronic ammunition shortages. Weber lay in his sleeping bag that night thinking about the Sherman's 90 rounds. He had mocked American tanks since Normandy. The Sherman was inferior in armor, inferior in gunpowder, inferior in crew protection. German tankers called them Tommy Cookers because they burned so easily when hit. British tankers called them Ronsons for the same reason. But the Sherman had one advantage that overwhelmed all of its disadvantages. There were thousands of them, and each one carried 90 rounds of ammunition. And when those 90 rounds were expended, more ammunition arrived. Always. Consistently. Reliably. German tankers fought with superior equipment and insufficient supply. American tankers fought with inferior equipment and unlimited supply. In a war of attrition, supply mattered more than equipment quality. Weber understood this now. The war was lost. Not because German tanks were bad, not because German crews were incompetent, because Germany could not sustain its military logistically against an enemy with functionally unlimited industrial production. November 22nd, Weber's Panther returned to combat. 18 rounds of ammunition had arrived during the night, not the 20 or 30 promised, but better than nothing. 32 rounds total, enough for one engagement, maybe two. His company now consisted of 3 Panthers and 2 Panzer IVs, 5 tanks total. Intelligence reported that American forces were massing for another attack, estimated 50 to 70 tanks, 10 to 1 odds. The attack began at 0900 hours. Artillery barrage first, then the Shermans. Weber's Panther engaged from a hull-down position behind a stone wall. Range 1,000 meters. Hartmann was firing methodically, 1 shot every 15 seconds, precision fire. Each shot had to count because there were only 32 rounds, 4 kills in the first 5 minutes. The Americans kept coming, 6 kills, 8 kills, 10 kills. Still they came. Weber's ammunition counter showed 18 rounds remaining. The American advance had not slowed. Destroyed Shermans littered the battlefield, smoking wrecks. But for every Sherman destroyed, 2 more appeared. Where were they coming from? How many tanks did the Americans have? 15 kills, 12 rounds remaining. Weber radioed his company commander. Request permission to withdraw. Ammunition critically low. Permission granted. All units fall back to secondary positions. The Panther reversed, using a dirt road that led through a small village. American artillery fire followed. 1 round landed close enough to throw mud across the turret. They reached the secondary position. A tree line overlooking a valley. Good fields of fire. Weber's gunner counted more. Shermans advancing through the valley. 20 tanks, 30 tanks. How many had the Germans destroyed that morning? 20? 25? The Americans still had more tanks than Germany had ammunition. Hartmann fired. Hit. 16 kills for the crew. 11 rounds remaining. Fired again. Hit. 17 kills. 10 rounds remaining. The Americans were not retreating. They were adapting. Some Shermans stayed at long range, suppressing German positions with high explosive fire. Other Shermans maneuvered closer, using dead ground and smoke. Combined arms tactics. Infantry-tank coordination. American doctrine had improved dramatically since July. Weber made a decision that would have been unthinkable at Kursk. He ordered his gunner to fire single shots only. Conserve ammunition. No follow-up shots unless the target presented a critical threat. This was not how German tank commanders were trained to fight. German doctrine emphasized aggressive action, maneuver warfare, offensive spirit. But doctrine assumed adequate supply. Weber had 10 rounds remaining and at least 30 enemy tanks in front of him. The engagement lasted 3 more hours. Weber's Panther fired 6 more rounds. 5 hits. 22 kills total for the crew. 4 rounds remaining. The Americans finally paused their advance at 1300 hours, not because they had taken unsustainable casualties, because they were consolidating their gains and preparing for the next phase. German forces withdrew that night. Weber's Panther had 4 rounds of main gun ammunition, 2 armor-piercing, 2 high-explosive, 4 rounds. The next resupply did not arrive for 6 days. December 5, 1944. A Wehrmacht repair depot near Düren, Germany. Weber's Panther sat in a maintenance bay, final drive being replaced. The transmission had failed after 200 kilometers, a common problem with Panthers. German over-engineering created tanks with excellent performance characteristics and catastrophic reliability. The Panther's final drive was designed for a lighter vehicle. The actual 45-ton weight created stress that exceeded engineering tolerances. Average service life before failure was 150 kilometers. Weber stood outside the repair shed watching American fighter bombers circle overhead. P-47s. They were hunting for targets. German vehicles on roads, trains, moving supplies, anything that moved during daylight. German logistics now operated exclusively at night. Supply columns traveled in darkness, unloaded before dawn, dispersed before American aircraft arrived. The system was inefficient but necessary. Daylight movement meant destruction. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. A supply officer approached Weber. Hauptmann Dietrich, logistics coordinator for the Panzer Regiment. Dietrich carried a clipboard with ammunition allocation lists. Weber asked about resupply for his Panther. When would ammunition arrive? How much could he expect? Dietrich's expression provided the answer before he spoke. The ammunition situation was critical. The entire regiment had received only 800 rounds of 75mm tank ammunition in the past 2 weeks. 800 rounds distributed among 42 tanks. That was 19 rounds per tank, barely enough for one engagement. Dietrich explained the supply chain collapse. German ammunition production was declining. Allied bombing had destroyed multiple ammunition factories. The remaining factories operated at reduced capacity due to labor shortages, raw material shortages, power disruptions. What ammunition was produced could not reach the front efficiently. The rail network was devastated. Locomotives were destroyed. Tracks were bombed. Marshalling yards were rubble. Trucks were scarce, and fuel was scarcer. The Wehrmacht was rationing ammunition like food. Weber asked about American ammunition production. Did German intelligence have estimates? Dietrich consulted his clipboard. He had a captured American logistics document. The document detailed ammunition production for the United States Army in 1944. The numbers were staggering. 75mm tank ammunition production exceeded 3 million rounds per month. 3 million. In 1 month, America produced more 75mm ammunition than Germany produced in 6 months. The document also detailed American stockpiling strategy. The U.S. Army maintained ammunition reserves at multiple echelons. Army-level stockpiles contained months of supply. Corps-level stockpiles contained weeks of supply. Division-level stockpiles contained days of supply. Battalion-level stockpiles were replenished continuously. An American Sherman tank battalion with 53 tanks, each carrying 90 rounds, represented 4,770 rounds in the tanks themselves. Battalion ammunition trucks carried an additional 10,000 rounds. Division supply dumps held another 50,000 rounds allocated for tank units. Corps supply dumps held hundreds of thousands of rounds. The American system assumed abundance. Tanks fired freely because ammunition was always available. Crews did not count rounds. They did not ration shots. They engaged targets until targets were destroyed or suppressed, then requested resupply. Resupply arrived within hours, rarely longer than 24 hours. The contrast with German logistics was absolute. German tanks fired carefully because ammunition was scarce. Crews counted every round. Battalion commanders allocated ammunition based on priority targets. Division supply dumps held whatever ammunition had arrived, often less than what was needed. Corps supply dumps were empty. Dietrich showed Weber another document, an American field manual for Sherman tank crews. The manual included a section on ammunition management. The guidance was simple. Carry full ammunition load at all times. Fire as needed to accomplish the mission. Request resupply when ammunition drops below 50% capacity. Crews were instructed not to ration ammunition. Commanders were instructed to authorize fires freely. American doctrine treated ammunition as unlimited. German field manuals from 1944 included different guidance. Conserve ammunition. Fire only at priority targets. Obtain battalion commander approval before expending more than 30 rounds in a single engagement. Crews were instructed to make every shot count. Commanders were instructed to strictly control ammunition expenditure. German doctrine had adapted to scarcity. Weber thought about the intelligence report from November, 90 rounds per Sherman versus 79 rounds per Panther. The numbers had seemed significant at the time. Now Weber understood they were symbolic. The real disparity was not the ammunition carried in each tank. The real disparity was the ammunition available behind each tank. American tanks carried 90 rounds and had access to millions more. German tanks carried 79 rounds and had access to hundreds more. Sometimes, December 8th, Weber's Panther returned to his unit. The final drive had been replaced. The tank was mechanically sound for perhaps another 150 kilometers before the next failure. His company now consisted of 2 Panthers and 3 Panzer IVs. 5 tanks. They had started the Normandy campaign with 14 Panthers. Attrition from combat, mechanical failure, and lack of spare parts had reduced the unit to remnants. The ammunition allocation arrived that afternoon. Weber's Panther received 24 rounds, 16 armor-piercing, 8 high-explosive, no smoke rounds, no white phosphorus rounds, just 24 rounds. His loader, Gefreiter Bauer, stored the ammunition carefully. 16 rounds in the hull sponsons, 8 rounds in the turret-ready rack. The Panther's ammunition storage racks could hold 79 rounds. They were 30% full. Weber conducted crew training that evening. He gathered his 4 crew members and explained their situation. They were operating with approximately 1/3 normal ammunition capacity. They faced an enemy with unlimited ammunition. They needed to adapt tactics accordingly. Weber outlined new engagement procedures. Engage only when achieving a first-round kill was highly probable. Range less than 1,000 meters. Target stationary or slow-moving. Clear line of sight. No speculative shots. No suppressive fire. No fire for effect. Every round had to destroy an enemy vehicle. Hartmann, the gunner, asked what happened if they encountered a large American formation. Weber answered honestly. They would engage the lead vehicles, destroy as many as possible with available ammunition, then withdraw. They could not fight sustained engagements. They could not trade shots with American tanks. They had 24 rounds. The Americans had thousands. The mathematics were brutal and simple. December 10th. American forces launched another offensive. The target was the Ruhr River crossings. German forces were ordered to defend. Weber's company established defensive positions on a ridgeline overlooking the approach routes. Good terrain, clear fields of fire. The Americans would have to cross open ground to reach German positions. Classic defensive setup. The Americans arrived at 0800 hours. 70 tanks. Weber counted them through his optics. 70 Sherman tanks advancing in multiple columns, supporting infantry. Artillery preparation. Air support. German artillery engaged first. A few dozen guns, poorly supplied with shells. American counter-battery fire was immediate and overwhelming. German gun positions were saturated with high explosive. The German guns fell silent within 20 minutes. Now it was tanks against tanks, 5 German tanks against 70 American tanks. Weber's company commander radioed all units. Engage at discretion, make every shot count, fall back when ammunition is exhausted. Weber selected a target. A Sherman at 900 meters, moving slowly across a muddy field. Hartmann had the target centered. Fire. Hit. The Sherman brewed up immediately. 1 kill. 23 rounds remaining. Hartmann acquired another target. 800 meters. Fire. Hit. 2 kills, 22 rounds remaining. The Americans were deploying smoke, white phosphorus shells bursting across the battlefield. The smoke obscured Weber's view. He could see shapes moving through the haze, but could not identify specific targets clearly. American fire was intensifying. High explosive shells were impacting all along the ridgeline. The Americans were not trying to hit specific German tanks. They were saturating the entire defensive position with fire. Hundreds of rounds. Weber's Panther shook from nearby impacts. Shrapnel rattled against the hull armor. Hartmann fired through a gap in the smoke. Hit. 3 kills, 21 rounds remaining. The smoke closed again. This continued for an hour. The Americans advanced slowly, using smoke and suppressive fire. German tanks engaged when targets appeared through the smoke. Weber's Panther destroyed 6 American tanks, 18 rounds remaining. The other Panther destroyed 4, one Panzer IV destroyed 3. Total German kills, 13. The Americans had lost 13 tanks out of 70. They were still advancing with 57 tanks. Weber's radio operator reported that the other Panther was withdrawing. Ammunition exhausted. The Panzer IVs were also pulling back, low on ammunition. Weber checked his own status. 18 rounds. He could continue fighting, but alone against 57 tanks, the outcome was certain. He ordered his driver to reverse. They withdrew down the reverse slope of the ridge, using a sunken road that provided cover from American observation. The German defensive line collapsed by noon, not because German tanks were destroyed, because German tanks ran out of ammunition. Weber's company had destroyed 26 American tanks that morning. The Americans lost 26 tanks and continued attacking with 44 more. German forces lost no tanks in combat but withdrew due to ammunition exhaustion. The Americans occupied the ridgeline by 1300 hours. December 12th. Weber attended a briefing at regiment headquarters. The regimental commander, Oberst von Schroeder, outlined the situation. German forces in the west were being ground down through attrition. Not dramatic battles with decisive outcomes, just constant pressure. Daily attacks. German tanks destroyed some American tanks, expended their ammunition, withdrew. American tanks replaced losses, resupplied ammunition, continued attacking. The cycle repeated. Every day. The Germans were losing through arithmetic. Von Schroeder presented statistics. In November, German panzer units in the Western Theater destroyed approximately 800 American tanks. This was verified through intelligence reports, gun camera footage, after-action reports. 800 tanks destroyed, a significant achievement by any measure. But American tank losses in November were replaced by December. Sherman production exceeded German destruction rates. America built 1,500 medium tanks in November alone. Germany destroyed 800. America gained 700 tanks. German tank production in November was 350 tanks total. All types. Panthers, Panzer IVs, Tiger IIs, assault guns, 350. German tank losses in November exceeded 500, from all causes: combat, mechanical failure, abandonment. Germany lost 500 tanks and produced 350. Germany lost 150 tanks net. The numbers told the story. America was gaining tanks, Germany was losing tanks. The trend was unsustainable. Von Schroeder also discussed ammunition. German 75mm tank ammunition production in November was approximately 250,000 rounds. Sounds substantial. Until compared to American production. 3 million rounds per month. America produced 12 times more tank ammunition than Germany. The disparity extended to every category. Artillery shells, small arms, ammunition, mortar rounds. Everything. American factories produced ammunition measured in tens of millions of rounds monthly. German factories produced ammunition measured in hundreds of thousands of rounds monthly. The briefing concluded with operational guidance. German tank units would continue fighting defensively, engage American forces when advantageous, inflict maximum casualties, withdraw before ammunition exhaustion, preserve tanks for future operations, do not waste ammunition on low-probability shots. Every round must achieve maximum effect. The guidance acknowledged reality. Germany could not sustain offensive operations. Germany could barely sustain defensive operations. December 16th. Adolf Hitler launched Operation Wacht am Rhein. The Ardennes Offensive, the final major German attack in the West. Weber's regiment was not part of the offensive. They remained in defensive positions along the Ruhr River, but Weber heard reports from units involved in the Ardennes. The offensive initially succeeded. German forces achieved surprise. American lines were penetrated. Thousands of American soldiers were captured. Hundreds of American vehicles were destroyed or captured. But the offensive stalled within days. Multiple factors contributed to the failure. Fuel shortages stopped German armor. American resistance was stronger than anticipated. Weather cleared, allowing American air power to devastate German columns. And ammunition. German tanks in the Ardennes experienced the same ammunition shortages that Weber's unit faced daily. Tanks engaged American forces, expended available ammunition, then sat immobilized, waiting for resupply that never arrived or arrived too late. One incident from the Ardennes became legendary among German tank crews. SS-Oberscharführer Joachim Paper commanded Kampfgruppe Paper, the spearhead unit of the offensive. His unit included some of the best tanks Germany had: King Tigers, Panthers, experienced crews. They advanced rapidly during the first days, destroying American positions, capturing fuel and supplies. But by December 19th, Kampfgruppe Paper was surrounded at Stoumont, Belgium. American forces cut Piper's supply lines. Piper's tanks ran out of fuel and ammunition simultaneously. His Panthers had been firing continuously for 3 days, engaging American tanks, tank destroyers, infantry positions, fortifications. When the ammunition was exhausted, Paper's tanks were reduced to static pillboxes, unable to maneuver, unable to fire. Paper ordered his men to destroy their vehicles and escape on foot. Dozens of Panthers and King Tigers were abandoned, not destroyed in combat, not defeated tactically, abandoned because they had no fuel and no ammunition. American forces reoccupied Stoumont and examined the abandoned German tanks. Intelligence officers documented what they found. The Panthers and King Tigers were mechanically sound, engines functional, transmissions operational, weapons undamaged. The ammunition racks were empty, fuel tanks were dry. The vehicles were abandoned solely due to supply exhaustion. This was December 1944. German tanks were dying from logistical starvation, not combat destruction. Weber learned about Stoumont from a regimental intelligence officer who had interviewed survivors from Kampfgruppe Paper. The survivors described their last days surrounded. They had destroyed over 50 American vehicles. Shermans, tank destroyers, half-tracks. Impressive tactical performance. But the Americans kept bringing up more vehicles, more tanks, more ammunition. German ammunition expenditure exceeded resupply. The German tanks fired their last rounds on December 23rd. By December 24th, they were combat ineffective. The survivors also mentioned captured American supplies. Piper's unit had overrun several American supply points during their advance. They found warehouses full of ammunition, stacks of 75mm shells, thousands of rounds. The German tankers could not use American 75mm ammunition in their 75mm guns. The American 75mm M3 gun used different ammunition than the German 75mm KK-42. Different cartridge dimensions, different propellant charges. Incompatible. So German tankers stood in American supply warehouses surrounded by thousands of rounds of tank ammunition they could not use, while their own tanks sat empty. The irony was not lost on them. America had so much ammunition they left thousands of rounds in forward supply points. Germany had so little ammunition their best tanks were abandoned. One survivor told the intelligence officer that he counted approximately 5,000 rounds of 75mm ammunition in one American supply point. 5,000 rounds. That was enough ammunition to supply Weber's entire regiment for weeks. December 28. The Ardennes offensive had failed. German forces were withdrawing. American counterattacks were destroying what remained of Germany's armoured reserves. The Wehrmacht had committed its last strategic reserves to the Ardennes and achieved nothing except accelerating Germany's defeat. Weber's company was ordered to prepare for American attacks along the Ruhr. Intelligence reported major American forces assembling, estimated 300 tanks, probably more. Weber's Panther had 21 rounds of ammunition, 21 rounds to face 300 tanks. The ammunition supply officer informed Weber that no resupply was scheduled. The ammunition trains were not running. Transportation infrastructure was destroyed. What little ammunition Germany produced was being diverted to the Eastern Front, where Soviet forces were advancing rapidly. The Western Front would receive whatever remained after the Eastern Front's allocation, which was almost nothing. That evening, Weber conducted a final crew meeting. He told his crew the truth. They had 21 rounds. They faced an enemy with unlimited ammunition and unlimited tanks. The mathematics were impossible. They would fight as long as they could with what they had. When the ammunition was gone, they would withdraw or surrender. Weber had been a soldier since 1939. He had fought in Poland, France, Russia, Normandy, Germany. He understood when a war was lost. This war was lost. January 3rd, 1945. American forces attacked. The assault began with artillery. Hours of bombardment. More shells than Weber had heard in any previous engagement. The Americans were no longer conserving ammunition. They were expending everything. When the artillery stopped, the tanks came. Weber counted them until he reached 100, then stopped counting. More than 100 Sherman tanks, plus infantry, plus tank destroyers, plus artillery support, plus air support. Weber's Panther engaged from a defensive position in a ruined factory. Good cover. Limited fields of fire. Hartmann destroyed 3 Shermans with the first 3 rounds, 18 remaining. 4 more Shermans, 14 remaining. American fire was overwhelming, hundreds of rounds impacting around Weber's position. The factory walls were disintegrating. Masonry and steel beams crashed down. Hartmann kept firing. 7 kills, 11 rounds remaining, 8 kills, 10 rounds remaining. Weber's radio operator reported that both Panzer IVs were destroyed. Crew casualties unknown. The remaining Panther was withdrawing, ammunition exhausted. Weber's Panther was alone, 10 rounds remaining, 100+ American tanks still advancing. Weber made the decision, cease fire. Withdraw. They had done what they could. 10 rounds would not change the outcome. The Panther reversed through the factory ruins, emerged onto a street, accelerated east. American shells followed them. They escaped the immediate combat zone, travelled 3 kilometres to a collection point for German forces. Other vehicles were assembling. A few tanks, some half-tracks, infantry and trucks. Everyone was withdrawing. The front had collapsed. Weber's company commander was at the collection point. He informed Weber that German forces were retreating to the Rhine. New defensive positions would be established on the river's east bank. All units would fall back in stages. Weber's Panther joined the retreat. 10 rounds of ammunition. Enough for one more engagement, maybe. They drove east through the night. American fighter bombers attacked twice. The Panther survived both attacks. Other vehicles were not fortunate. The roads were littered with burning trucks, destroyed half-tracks, abandoned equipment. Germany's army in the west was disintegrating, not through dramatic defeats, through exhaustion, attrition, and supply collapse. January 7th. Weber's Panther reached the Rhine. They crossed the river on a pontoon bridge near Wesel. The bridge was under constant American artillery fire. They crossed during a brief pause in the shelling. German engineers were demolishing bridges behind retreating forces, preventing American pursuit. Buying time. Time for what? Weber did not know. The war was lost. Weber's regiment reassembled on the Rhine's east bank. 4 Panthers remained operational. 4 tanks out of 42 that started in Normandy. The regiment received its ammunition allocation. 15 rounds per tank, 60 rounds total for 4 tanks. Weber's Panther now held 25 rounds, 32% capacity. This was Germany in January 1945, the best tanks in the world, the most experienced crews in the world, and 32% ammunition capacity. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.